the shape key of standing. The human experience of being upright, and where we might very often take it for granted, we want to really drop in and be deliberate in our presencing and tap into the creative freedom of exploring standing. So we bend the knees, we sink in to the ground, we drop our gravity center down into the pelvis. And in all the shape keys, these portals into movement, we're going to almost always find movement by accessing one of the two primary relationships in the human experience. Here, it's the bilateral, it's the side to side. So by letting the movement come from the playful pivot of the pelvis, the translation of source energy coming from the core, translating through the pelvis in the side to side dynamic, we're finding little side bends. We might enjoy as the pelvis brushes across the midline, the head is relatively still in the midline, more or less. But how do we resist our own movement? How do we turn on every fiber of our conscious animal so that we are more informed? A modulation of tone. So as we begin to move with more freedom, we might find elliptical movements rather than a side-to-side linear movement. We can, as seen from above, can be in a clockwise or counterclockwise orbit. Also allowing the pelvis to turn a bit, to pivot. The hips begin to articulate. We change directions. It's like hula hooping in slow motion with fantastic strength through the legs, the hips, the belly, really the whole body. Can we turn on the arms, the shoulders? So the diversification, the exploration, all of the variation is invoking the recovery, the remembrance of a deeper language, a more diverse language of expression. Through movement, through breath, through energy, it is all unified. And so in a way, you're touching dance. You're touching the origin of the impulse of dance, the impulse of practices, beautiful practices such as Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga. We want to stay in that stream. We stay in that fluid stream of potentialities and let them come through and really embrace the movement by turning on, again, turning on every fiber. See if we can hold in our field of embodied awareness every cell, every bone. The other primary relationship through which we find the rhythm of movement in these shapes, in the shape keys, is through the front and back relationship, the anterior and posterior relationship. So where we were just playing around in the field of side to side of the bilateral, now we set up an asymmetrical stance with one foot leading, and we start to play with pulling ourselves forward and pushing ourselves back. So the pulling is something that helps us orient to function. We pull the ground back with the feet to send the pelvis forward. We push the ground forward with the feet to send the hips back. There starts to be a deep invitation at the front of the movement into a back bend, so we might extend the spine. And towards the back of the space, we might flex a little bit. So flexion here, folding at the hips a little bit, and then pulling forward again into an extension. And pushing back. And so this rhythm, this deep rhythm of pull and push, something we did inside the womb and have been doing more or less since we've come into the world, we return to that same curiosity. What is the curious... What is the question in the creative process? What can I become? what's possible without trying to think our way through it. We want to feel the various translations as they emerge. A lot of variation will be found not only in these two primary relationships, but also just changing directions and also articulating more creative expression through hips and shoulders. So it is quite mimetic here as we use the arms to pull and push against the quantum fabric, using all four limbs, tying everything together. The movement, again, it continues to come from the pelvis. We want to constantly allow for Source to guide us, to light up the core engine and move the pelvis as the origin of moving the whole body. You can also play with rotation of the hips. Some of the most diverse expressions are just simply turning one hip in, one hip out, playing with medial and lateral rotation, letting the legs do things that are different from each other so we're not always symmetrical in our action, but translating asymmetry, slow and strong, and at the same time supple, very supple. These are all loose descriptions of conscious animal. Here we're moving in an elliptical in the front back domain still, but now the pelvis is on a more elliptical path, less linear. Can be very challenging for balance, but is extraordinarily juicy for finding more and more subtle variations through the low back, the sacral plexus, the hips. And when we're in an asymmetrical setup, it's a good idea to change sides whenever you need to. Whether you just switch your legs or you actually turn around, we don't want to over-fatigue one side of the body too much. It gives us longevity and staying power. We want to allow our systems to self-balance. So this very slow, very strong, wild expression of what I like to call a functionally sassy pelvis. The shape of standing as a practice. So sublime.